Hello everyone, welcome back to Dudes Brews. So in this video, we've got a bit of a double hitter. We are going to be sharing a recipe for this West Coast Pale Ale, which features three big hitting hops, Centennial, Simcoe and Krush. And I'm also going to be talking about the yeast that I've used in it, which is High Voltage from WHC. So we're going to go through the recipe and kind of do a little bit of a review of this yeast at the same time. So let's get into it. So the previous videos I've done that featured kind of West Coast style beers have gone down pretty well. So here's another recipe. This is an American Pale Ale, but kind of leaning into the kind of West Coast style. So quite high on the bitterness, quite prominent piney and resinous kind of citrus hop profile to it. And for this particular beer, I did want to feature Krush hops specifically. Haven't used them much. I don't think I've put any recipes out before that have used Krush hops. And they're one of the newer varieties, which are, they're kind of got a little bit of an old school citrus flavour to them, but with some really bright kind of tropical notes as well. And yeah, I've had some fantastic beers with those in, so I wanted to try them out in this beer myself. So let's quickly run through this recipe. You can get the full recipe sheet via the Brewfather link in the description. This is an American Pale Ale coming in at, or targeted at, 5.6% ABV, OG 1055, predicted FG 1012, EBC of 9.7, IBUs up at 53. It is a West Coast after all, and that gives us a BUGU of 0.96. So for that beer, this is a 23 litre batch, by the way, and this recipe is working on an 80% brew house efficiency. So obviously adjust that to your own system as required if you're going to try and brew something similar. For the grist, we were looking at 4.4 kilos of Simpson's Extra Pale Ale malt, just a nice, solid, fairly neutral base malt to use for beers like this. And yeah, most of the Simpsons malts that I've used are pretty good. And then added to that, very simple grain bill, just 750 grams of light Munich malt. So we're not using any crystal malts or caramel malts in this, just literally pale ale malt and the Munich there. It's a fairly significant amount of Munich malt. We've got 14.6% of the overall grist there, and that's just going to help bring a little bit of extra body, a little bit of extra sweetness, a bit more malt character to it, without bringing perhaps that kind of darker colour that some of the heavier crystal malts will bring, and also an overt kind of caramel sweetness. So if we look at the hops, as I said, we've got three big hitting hops here. So Simcoe, Centennial and Krush. Simcoe and Centennial are very much classic kind of West Coast hops. They will work well in, they could work well on their own, to be fair. So you could do pretty good IPAs and pale ales with Simcoe or Centennial on their own. Some very well-known examples of that, commercially speaking. But put them together and you're going to get a really good kind of citrusy, piney, resinous, a little bit of dankness from the Simcoe maybe. Definitely some grapefruit, citrus kind of notes from the Centennial, and that also brings quite a bit of that resiny, kind of pine-like flavour, I think, as well. So those two are kind of giving you that base West Coast flavour profile, I would say. Whereas Krush, on the other hand, is a little bit more, still very citrus-led for me, I think, but it's got a sort of brighter citrus top note, almost like a mixed citrus breakfast juice type flavour profile for me, and a little bit of a top end of kind of tropical flavour to it as well. So a really, hopefully a really nice hop to combine with those two. So in terms of the quantities, I've not actually got anything in at 60 minutes. Although the IBUs are quite high, I've used quite a lot of late boil hops to bring the IBUs up. That said, about 10 of the IBUs are coming from the Whirlpool, and I would always say that those IBUs are likely to maybe be a little bit less impactful than what you would get earlier in the boil. So perception-wise, you're probably not necessarily going to drink this and think that's 56 IBUs like the recipe says, and maybe perception-wise might come out a little bit lower than that. But anyway, we start off at 20 minutes with 20 grams of Simcoe, 12 grams of Centennial. At 5 minutes, we are adding 10 grams each of Centennial and Simcoe again, and also 20 grams of Krush. We are then whirlpooling for 30 minutes with 32 grams of Krush and another 10 grams each of Centennial and Simcoe. And for the dry hop, which is a single dry hop addition, for about 2 days at 14 degrees, we're going to be using 48 grams of Krush, 40 grams of Simcoe, and 20 grams of Centennial. So it's a decent amount of hops in there without being up there with your kind of big, hazy New England type beers that we're seeing nowadays, and a good amount of bitterness there, although it is all coming from those later boil additions, as we said. Now, the yeast, which I'm going to talk more about in a minute, is High Voltage, which can be a very attenuative strain. So for that reason, I'm going to be mashing a little bit higher than what I would normally do for this sort of style. If I was using a standard ale yeast, we're actually going to mash it at around 68C. That is going to help keep the final gravity up a little bit, so it should be around 10, 12, hopefully. And that will still give us a decent amount of attenuation. It's just going to stop it becoming overly dried out and overly strong as well in terms of the ABV. Hopefully we'll leave a nice bit of body in the beer for us as well. And finally, water profile. I'm using my kind of typical pale ale, but with a focus on the sulfates kind of water profile for this, which is about 75 ppm of calcium, around 50 ppm of chloride, and around 150 ppm of sulfate. That's been achieved with some fairly simple additions of calcium chloride, gypsum, and Epsom salts. I've used phosphoric acid to acidify the mash and target a mash pH of around 5.25. So that is the base recipe, but we are here to talk a little bit about High Voltage yeast from WHC as well. This is branded as a clean thermotolerant yeast. I've talked about thermotolerant yeast from WHC on some previous videos. You can see some links to those in the description and up above as well. But basically, it's a Kveik strain, and this is essentially Lutra. So this is the same yeast strain as Lutra from Omega. And the idea with this one is it's basically been selected to primarily ferment extremely cleanly and very fast, because it's Kveik, so it's going to be fermentable at a very high temperature range and going to deliver extremely quick fermentation as a result of that. Let's have a little look at some of the specs for this yeast, which will reinforce that information, no doubt. So the recommended fermentation temperature for High Voltage is 31 to 35 degrees C, which is obviously quite a bit outside the normal range, but as we know, with these Kveik derived strains, they like a very warm fermentation generally, and that is going to help to push along the speed of the fermentation and deliver the beer much more quickly. That said, you can successfully run this yeast quite a bit cooler than that, and it's still probably going to ferment out extremely fast. And you may see an even cleaner result through doing that. There may be some added advantages to running it slightly cooler in terms of it not blasting away some of the kind of aromatics that are in the beer and other flavour compounds from your hops, for example. So that's something to consider. The recommended range is 31 to 35, but I have heard other people and been recommended by a few people that you can run it a little bit cooler, and that can be beneficial for certain beer styles. The ABV tolerance on this is 17%, so that is way up there. Not going to be many beers that you're going to be brewing that are going to need an ABV tolerance that high, but it certainly means that anything like double IPAs or triple IPAs even, or stronger styles might be achievable with this yeast quite easily. Nitrogen demand, which isn't something that I'd normally highlight on yeast spec sheets for this, is quoted as being very high. One thing just to point out with that is that particularly if you are brewing higher strength beers, that you may want to consider adding some yeast nutrients in with this yeast, because again, because the fermentation is so vigorous, the yeast might need a little bit of help with some extra nutrients to help it get through that. Attenuation, 76 to 80%. You can potentially see higher than that level of attenuation. I've seen a lot of people saying that they will get over 80%. And again, refer back to the reason for me bumping up the mash temperature a little bit higher than what I would normally do. Flocculation given as high, so hopefully we should also see it dropping fairly clear in most of the beers that you brew with it. So there you go. That is the specs for High Voltage. You've got the recipe. Now we just need to talk about the beer, which the head's dropped away on that a little bit, so I'm going to top that up. Okay, so appearance wise, let's have a look at it. It's got a nice frothy white cap on it. Colour is a light kind of straw, maybe slightly honey coloured golden colour to it. It does have a slight haze on it still. This has been in the keg for quite a long time now. I did use kettle finings with it, and I did use finings after it was in the keg as well. So I used some brow salt on this, and it went kind of fairly clear pretty quickly, but then it's never really dropped kind of pin bright since. Now, this is like just one beer that I've made with this yeast, so I'm not going to say that like, that's definitively down to this particular yeast strain, but I think I would have expected it to maybe drop a little bit clearer after this amount of time in particular. So be interested to hear if anyone else in the chat has, or in the comments even, has got experience with how well this yeast drops clear, whether that is the yeast or it's another factor for this particular beer. We'll have to wait and see what other people think, I guess. But anyway, so yeah, appearance wise, looks great. Could be just maybe slightly brighter if you want that really crystal clear kind of West Coast appearance to it. Aroma wise, lots of citrus on the nose. It's got quite a bit of pininess there as well, citrusy pine notes. Quite a lot of sweet tangerine-like citrus on there. So yeah, there's a little bit of a sweet note to it. Not getting a huge amount kind of malt-wise from the aroma. Yeah, so it maybe the aroma could be a little bit more punchy, but it's got a very pleasant citrusy lead, slightly piney. Yeah, smells like an American pale ale basically. Let's get into tasting it. So you do get a nice whack of bitterness up front. As I said, I don't really feel like it tastes like it's a sort of 56 IBU beer. When I brewed this, the yeast did absolutely smash through the fermentation. It was done in a couple of days at most. I think probably even quicker than that. The fermentation was actually kicking off within, I think it was no more than 5 or 6 hours after pitching the yeast. So yeah, and that was actually fermented at a slightly lower temperature than the stated range. So I had it about 26 degrees, I think. I'll have to check that. And yeah, it still went off like a rocket. It was still fermented out in a couple of days. So as far as the, ticking the box for quick fermentation, the yeast definitely delivered on that front. So yeah, there's good bitterness there. There is a little bit of sweetness from the malt. The malt flavour is, there's not a huge amount of malt flavour there. It is only extra pale malt and Munich, so I guess you shouldn't really be expecting a massive amount of malt flavour there, but it's maybe a little bit lighter on the malt flavour. I think the gravity on this did come out at 10-12. I ended up with a slightly higher OG because I got slightly more efficiency than I was expecting. So it came out 5.8 instead of 5.8 instead of 5.6%. But yeah, it maybe doesn't taste quite as full bodied as I'd expect for a beer of that strength. It certainly is an extremely clean beer. So we've got bright hop flavour on the palate, nice clean crisp bitterness, light malt flavour. The hops are definitely delivering, again, like the aroma, a lot of citrus there, getting a little bit of resiny pine flavour on the back as well. So I feel like the Centennial and Simcoe are bringing that in, and a general kind of like grapefruit rind bitterness, breakfast juice kind of flavour. Just a little bit of a maybe sweet tropical element to it. I can't quite pick out what that tropical flavour is as such. But yeah, there's a nice sort of bright tropical top note to it, but mainly this kind of citrus, breakfast juice, grapefruit, kind of tangerine, little bit of pink grapefruit. I think definitely a bit of pink grapefruit flavour to it. It's good. It kind of delivers on most of the things that I was expecting with that hop combination. What about the yeast? So this, as I said, is kind of a video to review the yeast as well. So how do I feel about high voltage in this particular beer? As I said, I mean, I'm happy with the beer, so you can't be too down on the yeast if you're happy with how the beer's come out. It's 100% delivered on fast fermentation. It's 100% delivered on absolutely clean kind of flavour profile in the beer. It's maybe a weird thing to say, but is it almost too clean? As I said, I like the beer, but is it maybe a little bit one-dimensional flavour-wise because the yeast isn't really contributing anything else to it in terms of any kind of ester profile? I know we talk about kind of clean yeast being used for American pale ales and West Coast beers in particular quite a lot, but a lot of those supposedly clean yeasts are still going to deliver some kind of flavour profile or interact with the hops in a way that's going to accentuate their flavours somehow. I feel like this is probably one of the genuinely like cleanest yeast that I've ever used in terms of I don't really get that. It's not kind of emphasising the flavours from the malt or the hops particularly, I would say. It's a bit of a blank slate, and maybe that means that it feels like there's something just slightly lacking from it. I don't want to be too down on it because, like I said, it's kind of delivered everything that it says it will do on the tin. And if you want a quick turnaround beer, like, there is really no kind of substitute for this if you want to get something fermented into a keg and probably drinkable inside a week easily. But yeah, if I brewed it again and I wanted to make the beer as good as possible, I would probably swap it out for a West Coast style yeast like Bry 97 or even US05, perhaps, or WHC's own version of one or both of those yeasts, which is LAX. So yeah, very good, almost too clean, doesn't really bring anything extra to the beer flavour wise, which is what it says it's going to do, to be fair. But if you want a really super clean, quick turnaround beer, then it's a good option in that sense, I guess. Don't go trying to brew lagers with it though. That will not be tolerated on this channel. Okay, so let me know if you've got any thoughts on high voltage yourself in the comments. I do like this base recipe and this hop combination quite a lot, so I think that general kind of framework for the hop quantities and additions, you could play around with putting different combinations of hops in there. So, you know, any kind of classic sort of American West Coast hops or sea hops would be good options on that front. You could get some Mosaic in there as well, or some of the older varieties like Cascade and Columbus, Chinook. Any of those would be good options, I think. So yeah, let me know what you think about the recipe, how you've got on if you've used high voltage yeast before yourself, and anything else you want to comment on down there. Let me know. Always open to questions and constructive criticism. So yeah, thanks everyone, and we'll see you on the next video. Cheers.
I'm the dude, so that's what you call me, you know? That or his dudeness, or duder, or you know, El Duderino if you're not into the whole brevity thing.